Well, I appreciate that. Mark and Jimmy, I love these guys, and I'm grateful for their heart for Jesus. I'm grateful for their heart for the church. And it's just an honor to be here today to talk with you. I'm really passionate about this topic because when I think about the Church of Jesus, let me just ask you a question. Shouldn't the Church of Jesus be the healthiest thing in the world? Amen. I mean, we ought to be healthier than Chick-fil-A. I mean, we love Chick-fil-A. And when I think about Chick-fil-A, they're like, man, they have got it going on. I mean, everywhere you go, it's just consistent. All the stores, all the restaurants, it's just a beautiful thing. I don't think I've found a flawed Chick-fil-A yet. And I travel all over, and I can't seem to find one that messes up. They are so healthy. But the church ought to be healthier. We ought to be healthier than the healthiest bank in the world. We ought to be healthier than, you just name it. We ought to be healthy. But when I look at the church today, I'm not sure that we are healthy. I see a lot of challenges, a lot of problems in churches, and we've all experienced it. We've all been pastoring or we've all been leading in churches, and we would acknowledge that not every church is really that healthy. And I can't say that we always bat 1,000 either at my church. But let me tell you a little bit about my journey and how I got involved with Natural Church Development. I actually came to know them a little bit back in the late 90s. I heard about them. And then in 2000, I think it was 1999 maybe, I reached out to the Georgia Baptist Convention and I asked if there was any resource available that could come and help us evaluate our church. I'm not sure that I used the word health. I think I just said evaluate our church, help us to look at our strengths and weaknesses and so forth. They had a guy on staff who was a certified coach with Natural Church Development, and he came to our church, it was before I was here, and led us through a process. And I think that was probably my first real introduction to this organization. Though at that point I didn't fully understand it. He just came in, led us through a little process of answering questions about our church and printed out a profile. And it's like, here's your church, 8 qualities of a healthy church, here's how you score. And of course, back in the late 90s, that was in the early days of Natural Church Development, because it was actually formed in 1995. That's when the first book came out by Christian Schwartz, who is a German theologian. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. But that was my introduction to it. So when I came to Sunrise in 2008, Sunrise was in some pretty significant trouble. They'd gone through a lot of stuff, and they'd had some problems. And we were not in a healthy place. We'd lost a lot of people. And you think bringing in the new pastor would stop the bleeding. Oh no, it just kept bleeding. I mean, we're tying in tourniquets everywhere. I mean, it was just like we were in serious trouble. We were having trouble paying the bills. I didn't know what to do. I had to let one staff member go. I mean, it was an ugly time. It was very difficult. I'm not wired for that. It's not my DNA to sit down with someone and say, you know, God's led me here to be the pastor. If you can't let me be your pastor, if you can't follow my leadership, I mean, I'd love to have you help me and be a part of it, but if you can't, then I would encourage you to leave. That's not how I'm wired. I'm not wired to do that. I did have to have some of those kind of difficult conversations a little bit in the early days. And we just had a tough time. So in 2009, after dealing with some rough stuff for about a year, I brought our church, we have elders in our church as well as deacons. So I asked our elders to come together and I introduced Natural Church Development to them. I was a little sketchy myself, honestly, on the process, on how it worked and all that. But I knew that it was a great resource because what I knew is we needed to be a healthy church. I didn't want to talk about church growth. I want to talk about church health. I kind of learned that when I went through my doctoral program at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. I started my program working on my D-Min in church growth. That's what it was called. Halfway through the program, they switched it from church growth to church health. I thought that was interesting, that New Orleans saw the handwriting on the wall. It's not about being a big church. It's about being a healthy church. And actually what we found at Natural Church Development is that healthy churches grow all by itself. If you're healthy, then the Spirit of God can move and work in your church, and you don't really have to focus on how to get bigger. That's not really the objective. It's how to be healthier. And so anyway, so in my doctoral program, it made that little switch. So I got our leadership together, and I said, let's evaluate our church. Let's try to determine our minimum factor, and I'll explain that in a second. Our minimum factor out of 8 qualities back then was loving relationships. I don't want to say we hated each other, but I'm not sure we liked each other, you know. And so we had some issues. We had some problems because church had gone through some stuff. There was a low level of trust. It was just a problem. Now, I'll tell you what I have learned, by the way, now because of my role in Natural Church Development and working with churches around the world. Churches like us, when I say that, there's 3 different types of churches that Natural Church Development works with. They put us in 3 categories. So Baptist churches, we find consistently a minimum factor in Baptist churches is loving relationships. Significantly so. And I don't know, that's kind of a warning flag, I think, for us. Why is it? Why do we have this problem? I have some ideas behind it. But anyway, for us, that was significant. And so what we began in 2009, 2010, our church leadership with our elders and then our staff, we began saying, we have got to work on this minimum factor. There's 7 other qualities, but let's just focus on loving relationships because we're like off the charts on the bottom. And so we got real strategic on it and began planning events, working on things, planning preaching and teaching and ministry and all kind of stuff to try to help us work on our relationships. And it was pretty exciting. It took about, I'll say 3 years really, for us to turn the corner. But when we focused on our minimum factor, God began doing something amazing in our church. Now, that's not the only thing we did. We did a few other things, but we tried to do everything together. So that was kind of the underlying thing. We got to get together on this thing. And God began making a shift and making a change. And beautiful things began to happen. And God began to really bless our church. I'll say today, I would say today we're a healthy church. We're still not knocking it out of the park. We still got stuff we got to work on all the time. But God has really blessed our church. And it's a wonderful place to be. I've been there 18 years and I've loved it. My family has loved it. It's been a great place to raise my children. I've got 6 kids. They all love Jesus. And I love that. They're all serving the Lord somehow, some way. And it's just a privilege. So I want to talk with you for a few minutes about Natural Church Development and why it's been such a blessing to me and my church. And now I get to help other churches some. Obviously, I'm a full-time pastor, so that's what I do. But I do get to work with some other churches on the side. I just got back from an amazing trip to Papua New Guinea and the Philippines and China. And so, I should have said China, but yeah.
Quick question. How do you define what a loving church is?
Yeah, I'm going to show you the questions on the profile that your leadership answers. But it basically talks about relationships, spending time together. Do we really enjoy quality time together? Do we really share our hearts with one another? Do we really pray for one another? Are we really doing life together? And so I'll show you I think it's like 10 questions related to that, because I think I do have a slide that shows you that graph. I can't remember if that's my church from years ago, but I'll show it to you. And then and you'll see how that one is scored. Now, yeah, and thanks, Lou, for jumping in. Just feel free to jump in anyhow if you want to ask a question about any of this stuff. But I think a significant thing is this difference between church growth and church health. And if I could challenge you to do one thing, I would say don't worry about growth. Focus on health. Actually, what we have learned in Natural Church Development, and because we have studied now over 100,000 churches, I say they have studied over 100,000 churches. And this thing started out with Christian Schwartz in the late 80s, early 90s. He wanted to study what is a healthy church. And the most natural thought was, well, I need to go study all the big churches in the world. And he's from Germany, by the way, and he's not Baptist. Okay, so this is not just a Baptist thing. This is a church thing. What is it that makes a church that preaches Jesus Christ? What is it that makes us healthy? And so he studied churches all over the world. His first approach was to go study the big churches, and he found that just because you're a big church doesn't mean you're a healthy church. And so he had to change his approach because he kept finding dysfunction in the bigger churches. I don't want to say that's always true. There's some strong, healthy churches that are large. But just because you're big doesn't mean you're healthy. So I think that's the point. So this focus on church health, I think, is essential. I think it's critical. And let me just share this quote. This is pretty powerful to me. Have you ever read the book Canoeing the Mountains? It's such a good book. I just highly recommend it. Christian leadership is an uncharted territory. The most critical attitude the church must have is a healthy culture to sustain the mission of the church. It's so critical, a healthy culture. And so we'll talk some about how to define that. Now, I told you that Christian began this study back in the early 90s. He started out with 1,000 churches. And it was pretty neat. This past week, I met one of the guys who was pastor of one of those first 1,000 churches. So that was interesting. And then it's grown. I've got 90,000 on the screen. It's actually over 100,000 now, because we just continue to do this over and over and over. And so the data is just unbelievable. Matter of fact, it's pretty fascinating. I can get hold of the head of Natural Church Development America, and I can ask him any question, and he can pull out data and create stuff. I just did that this morning, and I'm going to show you the slide he gave me. I mean, this is like fresh. I say it's fresh. I think there's a date. I can't remember what date he said he cut off the data. But there's so much information that we glean and they study as they're constantly reorienting ourselves and figuring out how to help churches be healthier. But anyway, it was from all over the world. And I don't know how many churches now in the USA, but there's a ton of them. At this point, it was 45,000. There's a lot. And there's all kind of languages. I have taught pastors and church leaders all over, in Prague, Papua New Guinea, Manila. We got a group going to Iceland. I can't go to Iceland in June. My daughter's getting married. So I was like, should I go to Iceland or go to the wedding? So I better not go to Iceland. But it's just such a privilege to see what God is doing in churches around the world. All kind of people, all kind of churches. And it's fascinating to see that these things that Christian Schwartz put together continue to hold true all these years later. And it's just been confirmed over and over and over. Now, I think this is a big deal because when I was coming along in the really the 70s, because I've been preaching since I was 14. I went on church when I was 17. So I've been doing this for a really long time. And so I've been looking at churches that were growing and doing, and so I'd visit some of these churches. I'd go like to the Willow Creek Mecca, and I'd go and I'd study them and I saddle back. I wanted to be like those guys because they were models. The only problem is I'm not Bill Hybels and we're not Willow Creek. We're not in Chicago. We're not, and some of those things don't really work. You can't really take Saddleback and bring it to Noonan or to Fairburn or wherever. And so models are not necessarily the best thing. Principles are. What are the health principles that lead us to be a strong, healthy, vibrant church? Principles are transferable. And they're not just Baptist things. I just shared this with my church yesterday. I know I can't remember it all from memory, but it's fascinating. Let me just, if I can preface this. I went to Papua New Guinea to do a training for church leadership. And I looked at who was coming and I saw that there weren't any Baptists on the list. That kind of bugged me. I'm like, where are the Baptists? We need to get them here, right? So I reached out to the Baptist Association, whatever they called it there, and I said, hey, we're coming to Port Moresby. I'd love to have some Baptist pastors come be a part of the training. And the guy wrote me a letter back, and he said, are you part of the Baptist World Alliance? And I had to say, no, I'm not. I knew as Southern Baptists we weren't. I didn't remember the history behind it. There is a little bit of history, I think. We used to be, but we're not anymore. It's been forever ago. And so I had to write him back and say, no, we're really not. I honestly don't know a lot about the Baptist World Alliance, but we're not. But we'd love to have you guys come and be a part of it. And I never heard from him again. So I'm Baptist, he's Baptist, but I'm the wrong stripe of Baptist. And so he didn't want to come to our training. I think that's so unfortunate. It's not like his life was going to be changed because I was speaking. But I do think their ministry could have been changed if we could all work together on trying to figure out how to have a healthy church. And I think it's unfortunate when we get so focused on our little corner of the world and pretend like God's not working anywhere else. Actually, if you look at all the history of the revival movement, starting with the First Great Awakening, that did not start with a bunch of Baptists. It started with Congregationalists. And then there were some Anglicans in there. And then the Second Great Awakening in the late 1700s, early 1800s. That Charles Finney was a lawyer. He was a Presbyterian. And he was the great revivalist back then. Now, there were the Methodist circuit riders. They were part of that, going around preaching, and God was moving and working. There were some Baptist preachers thrown in there as well. But it was not a Baptist thing. So if we are waiting around on a Baptist movement of God, we're going to miss the movement of God. And so, I don't want to, I'm Baptist through and through. Listen, I'm glad and grateful to be Southern Baptist. I love most of what we do. And I think that there's some really good things going on and God is working through our denomination, and I'm grateful for it. But I will say, God does move in other ways. Let's don't miss it. And so I'm grateful to be part of Natural Church Development because it does connect with churches all over the world, all stripes. If you preach Jesus, we look at principles of church health, not models. So we looked through the scriptures. Of course, the work was done initially not just biblically, but on research as well. What are healthy churches around the world? What are they doing? How is God working? Let's look directly at these churches to see what principles really are being fleshed out. And so that's how it started. Now, one thing that I do when I work with churches, my brother and I do this together as best we can with whatever extra time we have. We love going in and coaching churches and helping them through the process. We say, if you're going to be a healthy church, you got to be made up of healthy church members, healthy Christians. Not only that, if you want to be a healthy church, you need to be a healthy pastor. You need to be a healthy leader. So we talk about that as well. And I'm actually working on a book right now called Balanced Christian Leadership that Natural Church Development will publish. But when we step in, the first thing that we do is we take your church through a 30-day Bible study on healthy spirituality for you as an individual Christian. And we take the concepts that we're going to later be talking about corporately with the whole church, with Natural Church Development, and we apply them to the individual Christian and say, what does this mean? How can you be healthy as a Christian? And we use the 8 qualities of a healthy church and we apply them as 8 qualities to the healthy Christian. And I think it sort of opens up our minds to understand where the church eventually is going to be going, but it also challenges you as an individual Christian to be healthy as you grow in your spiritual walk and you pursue Jesus. And we found this to be an amazing thing, not because my brother and I wrote it. I think it's amazing because everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's going through the same Bible study. Maybe the pastor is preaching 4 sermons that sort of relate to it. Maybe they're talking about it in Sunday school or small groups. We encourage people to get a partner to go through it with you, kind of a spiritual partner. You're praying together and encouraging each other. And just something beautiful happens when everybody's doing this together and God's Spirit begins to work and begins to move. And we actually have a copy of that book, I think, for you today. Now, let me just share with you the 8 qualities of a healthy church that Christian Schwartz discovered in his research. I just spent time with Christian in his home in Germany back in the fall. He is an incredible guy, brilliant for one thing. He was showing us some of his stuff, and we were talking about his work and just kind of connecting. And I saw one of his early books that he wrote that kind of lays out the Natural Church Development principles or concepts, and it was in like 30-something languages on his shelf. And I was looking at them, and because I'm an author and I'm working with translating, I'm trying to get my books in Spanish right now. I'd love to get them in some other languages. And so I was just curious how Christian did it. I said, so you have translators in all these languages? He said, no, I wrote those. And I said, you wrote this, in Portuguese and in all these languages that I'm looking at? Yeah. And I said, you've got a gift for languages. He said, no, I don't really have a gift for languages. Yeah, you do. He's a brilliant guy. And he knows the scripture, and God's doing some really interesting things in his life. But he came up with these 8 qualities. And let me just mention of these 8 qualities, you'll notice on the right side is the noun. Every church has leadership, right? I mean, we're all leaders of some form or fashion. We've all got leadership in our church. Healthy churches have empowering leadership. It's not just empowered leadership, but empowering leadership. And there's a big difference. That is that we're raising up leaders. We're not only empowering them to do work, but they are empowering others to do work. So it's this process of always handing off ministry. So a healthy church has to figure this out. And I will say that this has not always been our strength at my church. We got to really work on that all the time. Every church has some version of ministry. We all do ministry in some way. A healthy church is going to have gift-based ministry. That is, we help our church understand their spiritual gifts. We help them understand how are they wired? What is their DNA? How has God made them? What are their experiences? What are things that they can do that God has uniquely made them to do, and we release them to go do it. And so just because we have a need, and see, it changes everything, how we do it. We don't get up in front of the church and say, hey, we have so many preschoolers. We have so many babies. I mean, our church is exploding in babies and preschoolers. We need workers all the time. But we don't ever get up and say, hey, we need some more people in the nursery because, I don't know, we're going to start bringing babies into service if we don't, do something. We don't do that. We try to find people with gifts of helps and gifts of service. And we try to staff our ministries through gifts and not through need. And I think that's a big deal. If we can figure out how to do that. Now, I tell you, sometimes it's hard because the needs are screaming, right? Oh, we got to have somebody to feed people on Wednesday night. What are we going to do? We got to find somebody. And so it's hard to orient ourselves to that. But gift-based ministry is a quality of a healthy church. Every church is spiritual in some way, right? Spirituality, hopefully, is part of what we do. But a healthy church is passionate about this, loving Jesus, passionate intimacy. And there's all kind of stuff connected to this. We could talk about discipleship and some of the underlying things that make that happen. But the quality of a healthy church is passionate spirituality. That we really do talk about experiencing God and loving God with all of our heart. And so passionate spirituality. Another one is structures, and this is our minimum factor right now. Structures. Everybody's got structures. We've got systems on how we do things. A healthy church is going to have effective structures. So we have things in place that help us accomplish the ministry. The systems that help things hum along. And it's a balance thing all across the board. The problem that we're having, our church is growing, and maybe what was effective some years ago isn't effective anymore. So you got to figure this out. And you know how we are as Baptists. We don't like to quit stuff. Quit a program? You got to be kidding. I think it was Rick Warren I heard say this years ago, if the horse is dead, dismount. I mean, get off the thing, And so I think we need to learn that and figure that out. But so effective structures, it's really so important. And I think maybe we'll nail it this year, but I don't know, 5 years from now, we got to keep nailing it. We got to keep working on this because structures keep changing as we grow bigger. Our leadership style changes. There was a time in my life I knew the name of everybody in my church. I don't know that anymore. I did remember your name, David, but I don't remember. I don't know everybody. I'm not sure I've ever met everybody. Matter of fact, this is a crazy story. I probably don't need to do this too much. But my daughter sent a picture out. This is my oldest daughter. She's married. She sent a picture of this guy out on our family thread. And actually, what she was trying to do was trying to hook my younger daughter up with him. She was playing a little matchmaker. And so she sends this picture of this guy out, and she said on our little family text thread, "Does anybody know this guy?" And I looked at the picture, and I said, "No, I don't know him, but I know where he is." He had a backpack on, and I reckon I'm hiking the Appalachian Trail. I'll finish this year, by the way. I'm pretty excited. I started in Georgia eons ago, like I was 22 years old. And I'm going to finish it. I'm going to climb Katahdin this summer, so I'm pretty excited. Hopefully I can lose 15 pounds before then. But anyway, so she says, "Does anybody recognize the picture?" And I said, "I don't recognize him, but I know where he's at. I've been there on the Appalachian Trail." And she introduced him, and she said, "Well, he goes to our church." Why don't I know this guy? He hadn't joined, but he attends our church regularly, he and his sister back then. And so anyway, they ended up getting married before it was over with. So he's now my son-in-law. So how cool is that? And he is a great guy. Man, we are just so blessed. Did you ever find out his name? Yeah, Davis Ozier. He's my son-in-law, and I love him. He's a great guy. And now they're back in our church. They moved away to Chattanooga, and now they're back. So we're thrilled with that. So effective structure. I don't know how I got into that story, but the bigger you get, that's where I was going. The bigger you get, you just have to adjust your leadership and figure out how to do it. It's like Lyle Schaller years ago. I read a book he wrote. I can't remember the name of it. But he talked about, and he's not dealing with biblical stuff. Okay, this is not a theological statement. But as a pastor, as you get bigger, you grow from being a shepherd kind of leader to a rancher kind of leader. It's difficult to know everybody's name, and it's okay if your church gets that big. Just make sure that you have staff people that know everybody's name. Make sure that there is a pastoral system in place. You have a structure for that. We do use the Deacon Family Ministry Plan, and it is excellent. I mean, that thing came out in the 80s, I think. I don't know when it came out. But it is a great program, so why not use it for your pastoral care? It works in my church. You got to work it, though. It don't always work. You got to really work it. Yeah, David?
I've been on the receiving end of that. I don't think I've ever had a staff member minister to my family, but I've had multiple deacons minister to my family.
To me, that's beautiful. Whenever we have pastor appreciation, we ought to recognize the deacons in my church. They're the pastors in our church. I don't always know what's going on. I can't keep up with everybody. It's impossible. But our deacons have it going on. And matter of fact, I got a text this morning. "Hey, Kathy's having surgery today." And I'm just grateful for those guys. They're all over it. And I really appreciate how they do that. Worship services, we all have worship services, right? But healthy churches have inspiring worship services. They inspire us to love Jesus more. They inspire us to want to get into the Word of God. They inspire us to want to reach the world for Jesus. They're inspiring. Unfortunately, I've been in a lot of worship services that were not inspiring. They were dead and dry as the Sahara. And I think, think about it, guys, as pastors, as church leaders, having a boring worship service is almost a sin. We are gathered to worship the King of Kings and to talk about the most important thing in all the world. Why in heaven's name would it be boring? It just ought not be. We ought to work on that. And it doesn't matter what size church we are. And I'll just tell you this, I don't think it matters the gifts we have in our church. And I know it gets easier when you have talented people and people who can sing and but there's a lot of stuff that leads to an inspiring worship service. You don't have to have a Class A amazing pianist to be able to pull it off. There's a lot of ways that you can have inspiring. Anyway, we'll talk more about that maybe. Small groups, everybody's got them. Maybe you call them Sunday school or whatever you call them, but we've got small groups of some kind. But healthy churches have holistic. That means balance. So we're studying the Bible, we're praying together, we're building relationships with one another, we're doing ministry in the community, we're doing missions around the world. So it's holistic, it's balanced, we're dealing with every aspect of the Christian life. We're doing life together. I'm a part of 2 small groups in my church. One's a men's group and one's a married group I do with my wife, and I love it. I am an interior kind of guy. I'm like a loner kind of guy. I function well all alone, studying, writing, praying. That's just how I'm wired. I can stand up in front of people, but I'm wired to be alone. And there's part of me, I hate to admit this, there's part of me, like on a Friday night, I've got men's group on Saturday morning, I'm like, oh God, I got to go to men's group. I mean, why do I have to go to men's group? Because I'm the pastor. If I don't show up, it looks bad. So I got to go, and I don't want to go. I'm tired, you know how that is. But I go anyway, and at the end of that small group, I'm like, that was so good. That was like life for me. That was life-giving. Why would I ever say I don't want to go? And I remind myself every now and then, I was like, do I really have to go? Oh, you need to go. It's life-giving. And so I need that in my life. I need those friendships, that community. I heard years ago that being a pastor is a lonely thing. It doesn't have to be lonely. That's our choice. So anyway, so small groups. Evangelism, we better have evangelism. But if you want to have a healthy church, need-oriented evangelism. How can you tell someone that Jesus is the living water if they're thirsty, right? So let's give them a cup of cold water and then talk about Jesus. And so it's the idea of meeting people where they are, helping. It's fascinating to me that one of the criticisms of Jesus was that he was a friend of sinners. How was that so? I think it was so because he met people where they were and just loved on them. He didn't have an agenda just to love on them. And I think that's this need-oriented. What are their needs? And how can we help them? I realize there's balance. I understand. I know there's people out there taking us for a ride. I mean, I get all that. And we have to be wise on how we do. I mean, sometimes the greatest way to show love is to say no. I mean, we get all that. I've had a brother who is a drug addict for 35 years. And he got clean about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. So thank God for that. But it took us saying no to help him overcome his addiction. And so sometimes saying no is hard. But we got to do it. But anyway, need-oriented evangelism. So we're figuring out what their need is, and then we're pointing them to Jesus, and then loving relationships. We've all got relationships, but are they really loving? Do we really love each other? Like, are we really praying for each other? Are we really doing life together? Or do we really care for one another? And so these are the 8 qualities of a healthy church. And I love this next illustration. Whenever we do a profile with a church, I mean, you could really get wiped out focusing on all 8 of them because we all find weaknesses in all 8 areas. But what we say is focus on the minimum factor, your least area. I love this illustration of a bucket. All these staves are various heights. They represent the different 8 qualities, but the water is going to leak out of the lowest stave. And so work on that. Fix that. Raise that stave up. And this illustration shows this water represents worship attendance. It could represent so much. It could represent spiritual fruit. It could represent growing relationship with Jesus. It could represent real ministry, healthy marriages, strong families, whatever you want to put in there. But this lowest stave, you got to boost that up if you're going to see that quality improve in your church life. And so like I mentioned, our lowest one was loving relationships eons ago. And we really worked on that. Today, when we take the profile, it's like right at the top. And I love that. So the minimum factor, improving the minimum factor increases your church's health. Now, whenever a church goes through a profile, and I'll explain how we do that in just a second, but you get this, this is like one of the early pages that shows how you score on all the areas. It uses this graph. We have found that top number is 65, that top line, this bottom line is 35. So there's about 15%, this is a mathematical thing, all right, that's the other side of my brain, but it's a mathematical thing. There's 15% of the churches are in that upper healthy range. This 50 is the average of churches in America. We don't compare ourselves with churches around the world. It's a mean of American churches that are taking this. This bottom one is 35. And so now if you're 35 or lower, I don't want to say you're on life support, but you're in trouble. You need to work on that. This is really a weak area. And it should be a high priority. Honestly, if you're 50, can I just tell you, average is not that great. Do we really want to be average when it comes to being healthy? I look around, and I'm not really healthy right this second, okay? I got to lose some weight. I look around and Americans, we are so unhealthy. I don't want to be average because that means I'm going to be like way overweight. That's average. And so I want to be healthy. I got to work on this. So the same thing for us as church. We don't just want to be average. We really need to move toward the healthy zone, 65 or higher in all 8 areas. Here's a fascinating thing. Here's the new thing I pulled from, his name is Peter. He's from Czech Republic. He's a great guy. I contacted him this morning. He just had a new grandbaby. So I was like, I feel a little funny asking you to do this. But I said, this 65 hypothesis, that if you score 65 or higher in all 8 areas, look at this. This is facts based on data of 100,000 churches. Well, let's see, this is just American churches. So I should have asked him how many churches does this equal, but it's many thousands. And it's been confirmed over and over and over. So I asked for the newest statistic. And he says churches with all 8 qualities below 65, all 8, they're dropping, they're declining by 2.5%. Churches with some 65 or higher, their growth is 1.8% in a year. Average of 65, that's not all 8, but there's, at least an average around that, 7.9% growth. And if they're all above 65, it's 13.3% growth. I think that's significant data. And think about, I don't know how your church is. In my church, we have people coming and going. They're leaving, they're moving, they're, whatever. And so for us to have a net gain of 13.3%, I think that's pretty significant. To me, when I look at this data, the data by itself says, all right, sign me up. I really want to do this. I want my church to be healthy. I want to see us making a difference in the world. And so I think that's a pretty powerful little statistic. Now, I told you that I was going to show you some of the individual pages. Whenever you get a profile, you get a page on every one of the 8 qualities, and it shows you the questions in the profile related to that quality and how you scored. It's like in this illustration, there's empowering leadership, and look at this one, 21. Ooh. And this question is, the leaders of our church prefer to do the work themselves rather than collaborate with others. And on a negative stated question, they invert it because they want it to have a consistent visual appearance. So this one scored 21. That's like pretty serious. So with this church, I would say that'd be a good place to start. I mean, 21 is pretty low. And so what are you going to do about that to make sure, do your leaders really prefer to do the work all by themselves? We're supposed to be a church that empowers others to serve. And so we don't, as pastor, I don't want to do all the work. I can't do all the work. That actually limits what the church does. Let's see, what's the next one up? 33, many people are given the opportunity to actively participate in our worship services. You realize how easy it is to fix that? I mean, I could fix that by next Sunday if this is us. Just fix it. Let's see, what's the best one here? 59 is the highest score. Our leaders clearly believe that God wants our church to grow. It is a little concerning. You only scored 59. So we don't know that God wants our church to grow. But anyway, that's empowering leadership, all right? Loving relationships. Let's see, what is the lowest? Here's number 38. The atmosphere of our church is strongly influenced by praise and compliment. So you were asking about, do we really praise and compliment each other? Not just leadership, but honestly for me and my pastors. We talk about this. We ought to be writing notes to people all the time. We ought to be making phone calls, take people to lunch. Let's do something to say thank you. We love you guys. Thank you for this. Recognize people's gifts of service and what are they doing. Let's see, what was the highest one? I know of our people in our church with bitterness toward others. Okay, so this, now note, they inverted this, okay, so this is a negative. So this scored well in this case. That's a lot of people saying, no, that doesn't seem to be our concern. Here's one. Our leaders regularly praise and acknowledge volunteers. That sort of goes with the other one. I have a disagreement with a member of our church. If I have a disagreement with a member of our church, I will go to them in order to resolve it. Talking about loving relationships. That's how it's supposed to be done, right? That's what the Bible says. In this case, they scored 67. So that's not bad. That's above 65. You know how awkward it is. You have a disagreement with somebody, you just rather pretend like it's not so. But that's not the way to do it, you know. Here's this one. Our leaders show concern for the personal problems of those in ministry. I share with various people in our church about my spiritual journey. That's where it's getting kind of spiritually intimate. Like I talk about what God's doing in my life. Hey, I just sat down with a guy. One of our members went as a missionary to South India recently. And I went to the IMB to be a part of that service to set her off, to commission her. I sat down by this guy from Louisiana. I can't remember his name. And within the first 2 minutes, he asked me this question. So what's God been teaching you lately in your life? You realize how that just catapulted our relationship into spiritual conversation and intimacy. I was like, whoa. I mean, I thought we were going to talk about the Braves or something. But we're going to talk about what God's been doing in your life. That's pretty cool. So talking about our spiritual journey. When someone in our church does a good job, I tell them. I mentioned that one. I can rely upon my friends in the church. The atmosphere of our church is strongly influenced. I read that one. There's a lot of joy and laughter in our church. In our church, it is possible to talk with other people about personal problems. I find it easy to tell other Christians about my feelings. Now, honestly, if I were doing a survey, I might would have added a few more questions. But I don't know, for some reason they said this is good enough. And so this scores it. And even though when I talked to Christian, I said, shouldn't you change this question, or shouldn't you do this, or shouldn't? And he might say, well, maybe, but this has consistently worked for all these years. I know they tweak the questions every now and then, but it has consistently worked as a tool to measure health in the church, and the resulting consequence is growing churches and multiplying fruit. So anyway, loving relationships. I don't have one for everyone, but at the back of the little profile, you get your current 10 highest questions related, regardless of the quality. It shows you, like this one scored number 77. This is holistic small groups. I'm a member of a group in our church where it is possible to talk about personal problems. So in my small group, I can talk about my personal problems. That scored 77. That's pretty good. Let's see, the lowest one, this is in loving relationships. I can rely upon my friends at church. Scored 65. So here's the top 10, and then here's the lowest 10. Now, I'm going to talk about how we do this. We use a church health team. You would probably pull this thing out, and you'd look at these. Okay, this is the worst questions in the whole thing related to all 8 areas. I already read the lowest one. Here's another one on need-oriented evangelism. I know of a number of individuals in our church who have the gift of evangelism. That's not very good. That means our people don't know who the gifted evangelists are in our church, or that church. The atmosphere of our church is strongly influenced by praise and confidence. That's loving relationships, empowering leaders. I know that someone in our church will hold me accountable for meeting the commitments I make. It's not very good. So these are the lowest 10. Then I threw this one in here because I wanted you to see us. This is our church. And the thing that we say in Natural Church Development, this is a great health measurement tool. Honestly, we ought to do it every year. We've not consistently done it every year. I know some churches who do. I highly recommend that. I'm trying to get us to where we're doing that. But here is, we did it in 2019 and then COVID hit, and we just kind of spiraled a little bit after that. But notice this shows how we scored. I can't remember what all the average, I mean, it wasn't so great in 2019. And then 2025, this is this summer. We still got a lot of work to do. But what I love about this is that this will actually, I need to figure out how to do it, but this will actually give you up to 4 comparisons. So you can compare 4 times that you did it. So that's kind of a neat resource to say, how are we doing compared to last time? And so it becomes like a church health scorecard. All right, let me just share with you the process that this is how I do it, and I think it's kind of consistent across the board with other coaches with NCD. I don't know, you might have an opinion, Jimmy. Do we?
Whenever you want to take a break, we can get lunch, and then we can come back and hear some more.
Okay.
You can do that if you want.
All right, let me just run through this real quick. The process, the leadership, well, I really should say before this, we do the 30 days to spiritual health. And what I recommend on that is that we, and maybe I'll just say this and we'll stop for lunch, and then we'll come back to this in a second. I recommend that you launch this, because you want it to be a church-wide thing. You don't want it just a group of leaders in a back room talking about being a healthy church. I mean, it'd be great for the whole church to be in on it. And so what if you launched like a church dinner? Let's all get together. I'm Baptist. We like to eat, right? That's why they're having the banquet feast of the Lamb in heaven, so the Baptists will show up, right? So we like to eat. So why not have a dinner? Let's all get together. And then have somebody, I'll come speak, or have somebody else come speak, get Mark or Jimmy, or get somebody to come talk about being a healthy Christian. And launch this thing. And then what I encourage you to do with the churches that I've worked with in the past, I say this, now churches, they don't always listen to me, but I would say, don't buy this for your people. Let them buy it. It's only $8. I mean, that's like, what, 2 cups of coffee? And so what do you want to do? Do you want to drink 2 cups of coffee? You want to go to McDonald's and get a hamburger? Or do you want to grow spiritually healthy? You want to get fat, or you want to get healthy? So let them spend $8 to buy their own book. That's what I recommend. And I also recommend that everybody get a book. I don't know how you guys are, but when my wife and I are doing a study, I want my own thing. I don't want to share a book. For one thing, there's stuff in here you're writing little notes and whatever. And I don't know, that may not be consistently true across the board, but I think for me and my wife, when we do something, we buy 2 books. So $16. I'm out $16. I don't recommend you buy it on Amazon. It's more expensive, or somewhere else it's more expensive. So $8, I can drop ship that. But you could introduce this on the night with your dinner. Have a dinner, have somebody speak on spiritual health, and then say, tomorrow, we're launching this. Hopefully you've been building this up before then. Tomorrow we're launching this. Tomorrow is day 1 of our 30-day journey. And our goal is to help us as believers be healthier spiritually as we're following Jesus. And so that's what that is. So that's the first thing that I do before we get to this part of the process. So why don't we stop here?